I will open the City of Norwood Planning Commission for June 7th, 2023. Mrs. Town, would you please call the roll?
Chairman Powers,
Present.
Mayor Schneider,
Present.
Mrs. Sickinger, Mr. Hockney,
Present.
Mr. Sewer.
Present.
Item B on the agenda, approval of minutes. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
I will make a motion to approve the minutes.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Mrs. Town, would you please call the roll?
Mayor Schneider,
Yes.
Chairman Powers,
Yes.
Mr. Hockney,
Yes.
Mr. Sewer.
I need to abstain.
Thank you.
Motion passes. Minutes are approved. Moving to item C, the public hearing. Item C1, zoning ordinance text amendment to consider changes to section 1151.41, commercial uses in residential districts for proposed A, renaming to adaptive commercial reuses in residential zoning districts, and B, inclusion of various existing churches and other religious buildings as potential properties for redevelopment and reuse. See attachment for details on proposed amendment. Public notice appeared in the Cincinnati Enquirer newspaper on May 22nd, 2023. If the Commission endorses the zoning ordinance request, it will then be forwarded on to City Council for subsequent public hearing and possible approval. Mrs. Town, would you please administer the oath to anyone wishing to speak today?
So if you would like to speak for or against this item, if you'd please raise your hand. Yeah, your right hand, I'm sorry. Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Is there anybody in the back? Thank you.
We'll first entertain those wishing to speak in favor of the amendment. Please state your name for the record.
Hi, my name is Vicki Gary, Vicki-Garry, and I live at 2242 Cameron Avenue in Norwood. I've lived there for 30 years, and I am in favor of the change for the following reasons. As we all know, there are many churches in Norwood. Most right now are in use. There are several that are not in use. We live close to 6 churches, very close, within 1 to 2 blocks. The Cameron Avenue Church of God, Ashland Baptist, the Orthodox Church on Ashland, Love Divine on Forest, the Korean Church on Williams and Ellesmere, as well as the Grace United Methodist Church on Slane. So we live very close to a lot of churches that may be impacted by this proposed change. And the reason why I think that it's good is because some of these churches have a dwindling congregation. You have some that have just basically a few people. They're basically kind of holding on just for now. We have some churches that are farther away from us that have closed. And my concern is that if we don't allow a change, those buildings that are now used as a church will sit. You're going to have a problem because we have the great unchurched. We have the nuns. You know, I did the math. We paid for 47 years when you added each of our kids, their education, 47 years of Catholic education, but our kids are not going to church. That's their choice. They're not the only ones. There are lots of young people, as we all know, moving into Norwood. Lots of people in general moving into Norwood. Not necessarily young, but they're not beating down the doors to the churches. You have a few churches that are doing well, but by and large, they're dwindling. So what's going to happen to those churches? If they close, they're going to become blighted property. We're going to see churches that are basically going to fall down in our very eyes. If you Google, abandoned churches, you'll see several articles. There was one from USA Today, and I talked about how within like a 5-year period, a church that had closed, there was horrible leaking, there was a roof that came down, that fell down. It doesn't take long before a property deteriorates. And so the way to save these buildings is by giving them a new life. A life that is not going to mean putting in a gas station or something absurd like that. It would be uses that would be responsible, that would not affect the neighbors. There are insurance companies, tutoring businesses, all kinds of different places that could buy these churches, renovate them, and make them into usable space. And that helps Norwood. Why? More taxes that would be paid into the city. That helps the schools as well. So there are a lot of things that would be positive about it, and I am not seeing anything that would be negative when you actually read what has been proposed. If it were just carte blanche for you to say any business that wants to go in, I would be opposed to it. But it's not. It's very detailed. It's very restrictive. And it's a way that we'll have some of these buildings that have been around for decades be able to continue onward. And I haven't seen any reason why you wouldn't allow it. If a church wants to sell, if the restriction is that it can only be used as a house of worship, you're going to have very few buyers who would even consider buying it. No one is going to buy a property unless there is some type of economic viability that is available to them for it. So, the choice between potentially an abandoned church or a building that is being used in a constructive, positive manner that's producing taxes, to me it's a no-brainer. And in fact, I think it would be irresponsible for the Planning Commission not to approve what is being proposed today. Thank you.
Thank you. Do I have anyone else wishing to speak in favor of the zoning ordinance amendment?
I'll speak in favor if the commission please. This essentially would expand Norwood Codified Ordinance 1151-41 to include these church buildings and parsonages and Sunday schools that are immediately adjacent. And it's very limited. The safety valve is the Board of Zoning Appeals, which would consider all of these uses for conditional use analysis. And we're not talking about just plain, we're not talking about putting McDonald's or something into, the Korean church. We're talking about artists, studios, public uses, personal services, studio uses, artisan manufacturing, home occupations, Class A retail, art gallery, office, professional office, and some retail services. And so it's limited, and it recognizes that some of these properties would serve those kinds of functions very well. And this is, Mike Skelly and I have worked together. We've talked with Mark Reeves and gone over the text of this proposal, and at least I think it makes sense. I don't think anybody thinks, I shouldn't say anybody. I think Mike thinks it makes sense. But that's, it's up to the commission as to whether to forward it to the council for consideration. We'll submit it.
Thank you, Mr. Gary.
Thank you.
Now open the floor for those wishing to speak in opposition to the ordinance. We'll start here in the front row. Or if somebody would like to volunteer to come first.
Hi, my name is, excuse me, my name is Cameron Kelly. I live at 4343 Floral Avenue here in Norwood. We've been here for 14 years and happen to have a church nearly across the street from us.
Mr. Kelly, would you please spell your name?
It's Cameron Kelley. So it's my opinion that the abandoned church statement is overstated, if not completely untrue at this point in time. I've talked to several people that are familiar with kind of the church situation here in Norwood, and there's really only a couple churches that are available at this point if you wanted to go try to acquire one, and none of any significant size. The ordinance also includes parsonages, and I think that if we're looking at neighborhoods where there's mostly housing, residential housing, and to be able to convert those into offices when they're already residential housing, they just happen to be parsonages, is probably a move in the wrong direction as well. Churches also bring a lot of economic activity to Norwood, probably more than we would think. There's people that are dining when they come for Sunday service that may not live here. They're employing people. There's also a lot of intangibles that ministry has, of ministry on the community. Who do you call when you're hungry? You call a food pantry to church. Who do you call when you're flooded and want to distribute supplies like we did during the flood? You call a church. They're much more valuable in our community than it might seem on the surface. Also, there's plenty of office space available right now. As we all know, COVID has really decimated, if you will, the office market, or that sector of commercial real estate. So it's not like we've got a shortage of office space available, which the Korean church was being proposed for. So there's plenty of alternatives for somebody wanting to move their business to Norwood. Also, this zoning, while it may look on the surface that it has all what we would call good, low-impact businesses in the neighborhood, and I could stand corrected on this, but I went through the usage. Pharmacies are Class A retail. Medical marijuana dispensaries are considered a pharmacy. I don't want a medical marijuana dispensary across the street from my house. And we've talked about the safety valve being the Board of Zoning Appeals, but historically, I think that the Board BZA has somewhat erred maybe on the permissive side from time to time. There's also been a number of 3-2 decisions when it comes to contentious issues, and I personally wouldn't want to risk something like that happening based on one single Board of Zoning Appeals case. Lastly, I would have some concerns. I know right now, as one of the previous speakers said, that it may seem like church attendance is on the decline, but we all know the pendulum swings back and forth. And what happens if these buildings are converted and they are needed in the future, and there isn't any place to put them? I think that would be a tragedy for our community. So, in essence, I think that if these abandoned buildings become a problem at some point in time, why not revisit this? But I think we're trying to solve a problem that really isn't there, and it somewhat seems to be a nod to businesses at the potential expense of the neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome our next speaker to the podium. Please state and spell your name.
Dana, D-A-N-A, Boll, B-O-L-L. I want to thank Cameron. I share many of his points. You received this letter earlier, I'm assuming? I'm writing to strenuously oppose a unilateral zone change for churches in Norwood from residential to commercial. Any such change would be a betrayal of the role of the Planning Commission to protect our residential neighborhoods and citizens' quality of life, as well as our commercial areas. Current pathways require application on a case-by-case approach by developers to citizens for public review. This is necessary and provides for a public review period and for citizen voices to respond to setbacks, design, use, parking, appropriateness, and height. Community engagement leads to better results and negotiates a solution for all, in addition to creating long-term financial viability and sustainability. Our new construction and developments must attract citizens, not diminish or repel them. The zone change would significantly reverse homeowners' experience adjacent to existing churches. Norwood has a long tradition of neighborhood faith communities which are walkable and serve community needs generously without compensation. Such an arbitrary zone change would disregard hundreds of homeowners who are already concerned about overreach of large-scale development and student housing. These projects always grow and require more parking. I will add that we have been fortunate with current developers' proactive approach. Thank you, Nick Langenfelter. But cooperation cannot be assumed. We need protections. I hope this commission will focus on making our commercial corridors viable and humane and not commercialize our residential neighborhoods. Approval of such a change would lead to blockbusting of our already challenged neighborhoods. Imagine a gas station replacing each church. Developers must be prepared to invest significantly in design and prepare winning proposals for citizen review when working in Norwood. Not talking about Nick. Developers must meet the highest standards and continue to invest in Norwood, not erode the valuable assets we now enjoy. Finally, I am confused as to why a member of the Planning Commission and the Assistant Law Director were meeting with the developer and touring a property, creating obvious bias. Our paid professional economic and community development director, Mike Scully, was excluded, it seems. I'd love to be corrected. Isn't the role of the Planning Commission team to hear outside proposals with neutrality and objectively on the merits of facts presented in the Public Planning Commission? I ask you to think about the credibility of the Planning Commission itself. Respectfully, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. I'd like to welcome our next speaker to the podium. Please state and spell your name for the record.
Hi, it's Marilyn Hanrahan, Hanrahan, 2257 Monroe Avenue. First off, I'm going to admit I have not seen the proposed plan. I just recently learned about this and watched the meeting from last month. I'd like to say that making changes to zoning that has worked effectively should be approached with caution and a thorough understanding of the potential impacts on our neighborhoods. We currently have no issues with vacant churches, so why fix what is not broken? Zoning codes exist to protect the city and its residents, and any proposed changes should be carefully considered in that context. If churches are already zoned for mixed use, it's essential to clearly understand the specific implications of the proposed changes and how they may affect other properties owned by the church. Why change zoning for all churches when there is already a mechanism in place for churches that want zoning changes? Once purchased, is there a potential for tearing down buildings and constructing office buildings? what changes can be made to the properties. It is important to clarify whether the proposed changes would affect the entire church properties or only specific aspects. What happens when the church sells the homes next to the churches that they own? Before making any decisions, it's crucial to thoroughly explore and assess the potential unintended consequences of the proposed changes. This requires a comprehensive evaluation of the long-term implications and potential impacts on the community and our neighborhoods. Passing this issue along to City Council without providing sufficient information or exploration of the potential consequences is not a responsible approach. More information should be provided and thoroughly examined by this body before making any decisions or recommendations. I live 5 doors down from a church with no parking, so I'm concerned how this change could affect my neighborhood. And I'm not the only neighborhood that has that issue. Please be diligent in your analysis, research, and understanding of this issue before voting on what could change the landscape of our neighborhoods. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to welcome our next speaker to the podium. Please state and spell your name.
Yeah, my name is Chuck Smith, Chuck Smith. I pastor the Valley Church, 3836 South Madison Avenue in South Norwood. I've got a couple concerns that I'll share. I want to give some context on the front end, though, because I think it'll make my point a little bit better. I'm a Norwood guy. Grew up in Norwood, Maple Avenue. My parents still live in 1908. Grew up attending Ashland Avenue Baptist Church on the corner of Ashland and Lafayette, 3rd grade through college. Moved away for a decade, went to college, did ministry. I'll slow down, yes. We moved back in 2015, my wife and I did, to plant the Valley Church. And although we didn't start our church in Norwood, because our opinion was the same as many others who don't know church culture in Norwood, seemingly there's a church on every corner. The last place that needed a new church was Norwood. Within 2 years, though, we felt compelled to relocate the Valley Church into Norwood when availability appeared, simply to have more of an impact in the community that we learned pretty quickly did need more vibrant churches. We moved our church to Norwood in spring of 2017. We rented from Norwood Christian Church right in the middle of Ashland Avenue. In January of 2018, we moved into our permanent home that we have now, the building formerly known as South Norwood Church of Christ on the corner of Hudson and South Madison. We spent the last 6 years having the time of our life, doing life with the great people in the city that we love so much. I've also had a chance to connect with local ministry leaders, and some of the Norwood pastors here have become my very best friends. We do ministry together, events together, sometimes joint worship services together. There's been a phenomenal revitalization of church life in recent years with churches like New City Presbyterian and SNC Norwood, who just changed their name to Norwood Church. Love City Church, just across the street, Ashland Avenue Baptist Church. They're all doing great local ministry with a great level of growth and membership. We've even had new churches join our community with Grace and Truth Church, who now occupy the former Norwood Baptist Church on Court, doing a remarkable job loving on our neighbors. Churches in Norwood serve our neighbors in countless ways related to compassion and mercy care ministry, not just religious and spiritual purposes. I certainly don't have the time to tell you about the hundreds and sometimes thousands, literally, of people throughout the year who are fed, clothed, and provided counseling for. In fact, there are 5 food pantries in Norwood, all 5 occupied by churches. 3 of those churches have regular attendance of less than 30 people. Small churches bring great value to our community. Churches are often conduits to connect folks to local benevolent organizations. Churches lend their buildings out to scouts and other organizations. Our church, the Valley Church, was used by Norwood City Schools during 2020, spring of 2020 and summer of 2020, for kids that needed to meet with counselors while the school buildings were closed to them. Our churches provide events that are free for the community to simply bring neighbors together. Party in the parks, ice cream buy-downs, volunteers that we're sending to the local fireworks show, Christmas Town. Our church partners with Love City Church. We give out 1,000 Christmas backpacks during Christmas Town every year. New toys, clothing, and the such. I need you to also, Cameron touched on this, imagine the financial impact. I think the bad rap that churches get is we don't pay certain taxes to the community, and that's unfair because there's great financial impact that churches give to a community. Hundreds of congregants attend our churches in Norwood. More than half of my congregation don't live in Norwood, but they attend on Sundays. Where do you think they spend their lunch dollars on Sunday afternoons? In Norwood restaurants. Our church specifically has given out over 700 new pairs of brand new tennis shoes to Norwood students, as we've got a shoe closet that literally occupies space in Norwood Middle School that we fund with inventory. And this is just the tip of the iceberg of the great things that churches in Norwood contribute to the city. And I mention all of this simply so that you know that church culture and church life here in Norwood is very vibrant. And these are things that even those with a secular worldview can appreciate. And so I share all that context to share this concern. I watched your meeting from last month. There are a few things that were misrepresented that I've got concerns with. It was mentioned earlier by Cameron, but I can think of two current church properties that are currently vacant. The former Little Country Baptist Church on Globe, which is currently available for sale, and Church of Christ that exists up on Indian Mound. The only two church properties I'm aware of in Norwood that's currently available. And trust me, I've looked at every church property over the last 2 years in Norwood. You indicated there isn't a market for church properties. You indicated that if churches closed their doors in Norwood, then we'd be left with shells of properties that would be abandoned. This is completely untrue. My church, the Valley Church, is one of the churches that has a growing congregation of over 150 weekly congregants with a small property. We personally have been looking for larger space in Norwood for over 2 years. We can't fit into our current building very well. There simply isn't large church space available in Norwood. You referenced the Korean Methodist Church building as being empty. The reality is that those folks still meet on a regular basis. Pastor Park's a friend of mine. Also, we've been in conversation with them for over 1.5 years before they were ever mentioned in your meeting. Our leadership has been in conversation with the Korean Methodist Church folks for over 1.5 years about purchasing their property. In fact, when their pipe busted back in late January, early February, they called us to gauge our continued interest. I've got video on my phone from February 14th where our leadership team toured their property again and still expressed interest in their property. I know of also several growing churches from outside of Norwood who have tried to move into our city, but they can't. Why? Because there's simply no church properties available to them. There's one specific one who's pretty deep into conversations with a local church property about sharing space and leasing from them. So the notion that there isn't a market for church properties being redeemed by local churches is just false. And the last thing I'll say is that changing the zoning of these properties would make churches like mine involved in bidding wars with corporations who, outside of tax dollars, could not possibly bless the citizens of our city the way that our churches do. Imagine over the next decade as a handful of these sweet congregations decide to close their doors and their properties are sold to wealth management companies or, as Cameron says, marijuana dispensaries or other potential corporations that will occupy space in residential areas but offer limited services for actual residents. The goal of for-profit corporations is to make profit naturally. The goal of the local churches in Norwood is to love Jesus and to love our neighbors in ways that are invaluable and unquantifiable. They simply cannot be measured. So I ask that you consider these thoughts as you move forward with your discussions. Thank you.
I'd like to welcome our next speaker to the podium. Please state your name and spell it for the record.
Hello, my name is Sandra Kelly, S-A-N-D-R-A-K-E-L-L-E-Y. I live at 4343 Floral Avenue. So lots of stuff has been said that I completely agree with. The one thing I think that has not been mentioned that I did want to bring up is the size of some churches. So when the corner store ordinance was instituted a while back, as far as I know, that's only been applied for twice. But most corner stores are also small because they often were like stores that had the family living above it, and they were small stores, maybe 900 square feet or something like that. So I guess having a small business next to you that is very small would be less intrusive than potentially like some of these churches. And I'm going to use the example of St. Elizabeth. Most of you are probably familiar with that. Vineyard Central has been occupying that church for the last 20 years, and it's 10,000 square feet in the sanctuary. And so what you can do with a corner store that's 900 square feet is a lot different than what you can do with a property that's 6,000 or 10,000 square feet on the inside, and therefore might be more intrusive to the neighbors than say, a woman with an art studio, one person by themselves, using a corner store. That was really it. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to speak today? Okay, seeing none, we will close the public hearing and open the topic for discussion amongst the Planning Commission members.
If I could, I don't know who to direct this to, but my understanding from a BZA standpoint, this was specifically designed and written for corner lots in the city of Norwood to eradicate empty storefronts and try to add something in a very small, like Sandra said, in a small position. This, it just seems like if we want to do something, it shouldn't go here. It should be a separate section with detail and energy put into it, not try to mold it into something that it was never designed for. This was designed strictly for that small store, the mom and pop stores that all shut down around Norwood, that no longer exist, that had an apartment above. And I think it was well thought through. We've had a couple cases, and every time they come in front of BZA, it's a discussion, a very lively discussion of the neighbors. And thank goodness when I can't give credit to, I was not involved in writing this, but it's very well written the way it is for that specific purpose. So I guess I'm confused why we're trying to plug it into this, because it seems out of place, to be very candid. I was heavily involved in the closing of St. Elizabeth, and I was a member of that parish for 10 years. I'm not so sure it wouldn't have been better, sorry Sandra, it was so in such bad condition because of the financial, that it wouldn't have been better to have the dirt below it to help Norwood. But it's a magnificent building, but it's just gone through 200 years of really wear and tear. Now, of value, when there's an empty church somewhere, you always have dirt that's worth something. So I guess my feeling is it doesn't mean it's going to stay empty. Somebody can buy that property and look for it. Now, it can only put things that are zoned properly. I get that. Anyway, I'm off the subject. And again, I don't know if it's you, Mike, or who. Where did this come from? I mean, most of these ideas come from somebody who's driving an idea. I'm not saying whether I'm for or against it. I don't quite think it's the right fit. That's just my...
So I'll start off, and we'll be going back and forth, but at the last Planning Commission meeting, essentially it was raised by Tim Gary based on some inquiries that we received. So there was discussion at the Planning Commission meeting essentially endorsing that we proceed with the public hearing, which we're now here. So during that time, and again, it was a fairly quick turnaround, Mr. Gary and I worked on the draft. We included what we thought would be reasonable, and that's what you see in front of you. Specifically answering your question with regards to, is section 115141 the most appropriate section? That would be an appropriate question and reasonably debatable. I think we kind of use that because the city is fortunate to have an existing adaptive reuse policy already in place. And I'll stop there and say, you don't know how lucky it is to have that policy in terms of economic development, reuse of buildings, etc. So I think as opposed to beginning a whole cloth policy exercise, we were looking at using that platform and that policy as the stepping off point. And to further it, I think you're correct. There is a concern, and I've heard earlier through the discussions that introducing a church, which typically are larger structures, could offset the intent. And again, I wasn't here in 2013 when this policy was written, and the way it's clearly written, it has that context that it's probably for the small mom and pop type operations. But in drafting this, we did put a provision item, I guess we have different versions with regards to it, but essentially in the clean version, H, as in Harry, to limit it to, a maximum gross floor area of 1,000 square feet for individual spaces, and then the total for the entire building at 3,000. So that was one way to regulate the size and the impact on the neighborhood potentially, is to put that cap, both in terms of the tenant and the overall. And like I said, this is the first draft that we had. There could be other sort of caveats or criteria that we could add into it. But that, going back to your original question, that was our response to that concern,
Okay.
that it be overbearing on the community. So, Tim wants to add.
The other thing that I'd like to point out is Section G, which requires that any new commercial or residential use shall comply with all off-street parking standards as applicable. So we're not going to deal, the city won't have to deal with parking problems in broad strokes if this were adopted. Having said that, if the Planning Commission, wants to direct Mike and me, or Mike and anybody else to take a different approach, we're certainly able to do that.
Well,
Mr. Mayor?
I would point out a couple of different things that take me aback. One is the fact that there could be a pharmacy or a marijuana dispensary put right next to somebody's house. Really makes me, so then we've got that, and then we've also got potential, when we talk about retail, is that a check cashing operation? We could throw a check cashing operation in there. Or a vape shop could go in there, right next to somebody's home. And I think Pastor Smith brought up many good points. And it's of interest when you talk about a pastor that's growing his congregation, and his group has grown, and they've outgrown, and they're trying to look for another place to move where they can spread and do more good. And I know all of the good acts that the church, his church in particular, and many of the other churches, the good things that come from the community from these churches. And so those are two parts of it. The third part is, if it's not broke, don't fix it. And I understand this is coming in front of us, but I would not be a proponent of making this change right now. I would not endorse a text amendment change to do this, mostly because of the points that were made, all the points, the good points that were made. And, I understand that the Planning Commission is the Planning Commission. We're looking at the future. We're trying to plan for the future. But if there's not a problem now, and I don't foresee a problem in the future, quite frankly, I see us going the other way. I mean, I was around when the Presbyterian Church was dwindling down. It was a huge, thriving parish as I grew up, and it dwindled down to a small group of people that were taking care of that building, and now it's flourishing. I mean, it's huge and getting bigger all the time. The Nazarene Church was just about closed down. They were still active, but they were just about closed down. They're a flourishing congregation now. So, if we said, well, I can see something coming down the pike, it's going to be, in 2 years, we're going to have a bunch of these churches sitting vacant, I'd say, yeah, maybe we should be taking action, but I don't think that's true. I think we're going just the opposite direction right now, and that's why I would not be a proponent of this text amendment change.
Additional discussion? Entertain any motions relative to the zoning amendment?
I would like to make a motion that the Planning Commission does not endorse the proposed zoning ordinance text amendment change.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Mrs. Town, would you please call the roll?
Chairman Powers,
Yes.
Mayor Schneider,
Yes.
Mr. Hockney,
Yes.
Mr. Sewer.
Yes.
Planning Commission has voted to not endorse the proposed zoning ordinance text amendment. Now move on to item D, new business. First item of new business, proposed zoning ordinance map amendment by staff to include a planned unit development overlay of the 6.48 acres located on the northeast corner of Robertson Avenue and Beach Street, tax parcel number 651-0019-0127, multicolor corporation plan to assist the site's redevelopment and reuse. On May 9th, 2023, the city received formal notification that Multicolor Corporation will be closing their operations in the city of Norwood. I'll open this item up for discussion.
May I?
Yes.
I would say the first part of this, it says that we are doing this to assist in the site's redevelopment. And my first question would be, how does this, and Mike, I'll direct this, Mr. Skelly, to you, is how do you see this assisting in the site's redevelopment and reuse?
Thank you. So if, and we are of the understanding that they will probably be leaving the city, we now, and again, I don't have the figure in front of me for how many square feet this building is, but there's always concern, and similar to what we had the discussion at the hearing just concluded, that for Planning Commission or for myself as a planner, we're always trying to find out what is the next use, what's the alternative opportunities for that property. So it is a large property, it's a large building, and what the planned unit development option that we have in our zoning ordinance allows for either the current or even a future owner to explore other land uses through an expedited process where you would combine the land use concerns or issues or needs with regards to the development criteria. So for me, the benefit, at least for both the community, the city, and the residents, it just provides a little bit more opportunities and flexibility. Similar to your point as to, and we discussed at the hearing, is there a concern right now for it? And I guess the answer is no. We don't have the owner's representatives saying, this is what I want, this is what I need. We don't have their real estate agents kind of, pounding on our doors requesting such. So I think it's opportune for us sometimes as planners and the Planning Commission to get ahead of the issue and say, fine, here's something that you could use or not use. It's your choice. But it allows for that property to have that additional designation if they choose to use it.
I had a good follow-up right there in the middle, but then I sort of lost it. I mean, ultimately, this provides protection for the city, or it provides more versatility for the person who is maybe interested in that property.
And I would say yes to both. In the first point, our protection is both substantively for our policies as written right now in the PUD, but more importantly, a PUD application would come to this body first, and it could come through multiple meetings and hearings, and then ultimately would have to go to council for final approval. So to me, it has that ability to have the appropriate number of checks and balances throughout the decision-making process.
And if I may.
You may.
The last part, and Mr. Skelly, you had mentioned the size of the multicolored building. According to the auditor's website, the industrial space is 240,724 square feet. Storage warehouse is 68,701 square feet. And then office is 18,183 square feet. It's a huge building. And what goes in there is going to be very interesting to see what happens in the future. And it's sitting right next to, the stellar, Factory 52 site too. So it's going to be interesting to see how that comes down.
Correct. And again, I'm going to harken back to the discussion that we had at the hearing just concluded. So at this point, we don't have someone asking or requesting us to do anything. And it's very likely, what you heard at the last hearing, that another factory industrial user could potentially come into town and might be in needing of that space. So it provides that maintenance of a building, if so. But I would say irrespective, if someone does want to do a similar manufacturing use or something, what the zoning would allow, the PUD designation wouldn't take away anything. It's still there. If anything, like I said, it adds more if they wanted to do something. So.
Additional discussion?
Could we have comments from Mr. Lingenfelter, who owns the adjacent property to it?
Certainly, if you'd like to offer any.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Nick Lingenfelter on behalf of PLK Communities.
Nick,
So
would you please spell your name for our court reporter?
Lingenfelter.
Thank you.
First name Nicholas. So I want to start with, this is not us. So we have talked to them a few different times, and I think Mr. Skelly's right, but there's also a couple other concerns that we have. The primary concern is putting a PUD on without somebody's approval. That happened to us, and we always question whether that was actually okay, especially understanding that the property owner has not applied for it themselves. So even if it was us that was looking at this, there's a few concerns one major concern that we have, and that's the environmental concern. We always knew that a lot of our impact came roughly from that area, and they have 3 registered hazmat tanks on site. So your opportune buyer right now is likely somebody that's in the industrial user space. The other thing is to look into how they filed their no further action letter, because I think that's the important thing they keep telling people. That no further action letter is actually filed, and it says it must remain office or industrial only. It is not for habitation. So that parcel there, as well as the 3 acres that they have behind the temple, neither of those can actually have any form of housing on them at this point. Whoever buys that property will spend roughly 12 to 24 months trying to figure out how to get the EPA to undo their no further action letter and write a new one. So there will be a lot of going back and forth. I do think some type of restrictive, if you wanted to put that over there to control design, control whatever, to make sure it fits, to make sure the residents are happy. I think we'll point out too is that their fire line sits on our property, so as a neighbor, yes, we are concerned as well. They will need to work with us to do that, and their only access point is a road that we co-own, and they currently owe us for the repairs we've made to that. So there are quite a few things to think about in that property, but I just wanted to be clear so you all understood. It is likely not a residential use because of the EPA letters and classifications that they put in place. And if it was us, we would spend a lot of time trying to change it so there's a use that we can actually put there. So that's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor?
I'd like to throw another, one of the other items that was discussed when the hotel site was still being owned by the person in Dallas, and he came into town, and there was discussion of putting a PUD over that site at that time. And from the city standpoint, we said, well, he would make a request for that PUD, and that would go through the Planning Commission to be completed. He never did. And I don't know if that was just because he was lazy or because he didn't see a benefit to having a PUD over it. It just made it even more, I guess, more of a convoluted, work in progress to get somebody else to purchase it. That's sort of in the back of my mind. Well, why wouldn't the owner of Multicolor want a PUD over it? And are we doing a disservice to that owner because now we've made it maybe more of a challenge for him to, or that corporation, I shouldn't say him, that corporation to sell off the property or to get a new manufacturing?
Yeah. With regards to in terms of the owner's request or interest, I can't really answer that. It was more in terms of just providing for the document to be drafted. But like I said, ultimately, even with that PUD designation on the property, it's ultimately the owner's request to use it or go through the process. Now, in the case of the Quality Inn with regards to the prior owners, absolutely right. We made that offer to them. They considered it over several months, and I think ultimately it was a combination of reasons what we were told. They didn't necessarily understand the process. They didn't think it was at least opportune at that time in terms of trying to explore the sale of that property, and I think it was probably general interest. So for 3 reasons, they really just didn't want to bite onto that, option. So.
Okay.
Additional discussion? Seeing none, I'll entertain any motions on the topic, whether we'd like to table it, whether we'd like to set a public hearing.
I would make a motion to table this until a time uncertain. We can revisit it if it comes back up.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Mrs. Town, please call the roll.
Chairman Powers,
Yes?
Mayor Schneider,
Yes.
Mr. Hockney,
Yes.
Mr. Sewer.
Yes.
Moving on to item D2 of new business. This is a 2-part, each part dealing with PLK properties. First item of this is the proposed extension of Crown Avenue with a lot layout plan for 4747 Montgomery Road, former Quality Insight, regarding the justification for a road connection, potential for public dedication, relative to Ohio Revised Code, Chapter 713. Planning Commission has the authority to make a recommendation on this type of transportation matter. Welcome representatives PLK to discuss.
Thank you, Chairman Powers. Nicholas Lingenfelter, again, for PLK Communities. We appreciate you taking a look at this. This is one of the items that, when we originally presented about acquiring the property, the goal was to actually get rid of the easements in the front. So when this was all one continuous property that was owned by the Frisch's Corporation, they actually had common easements that ran all the way around the hotel. So in order to build the property to the street, we've spent the last 6 to 9 months working with the Triple Net REIT that owns it out of Orlando, as well as the Frisch's Corporation out of Georgia. So we have got them both verbally to agree to remove the easements, which would allow us to build the building to the road, provided that they have a road access to get in and out. So this road allows that to occur. It also serves a second purpose for us. We have committed to building roughly 8,000 square feet of retail on Montgomery Road. In order to achieve that, we have to have access all the way around the property for our tenants to be able to get their customers in and out. So today, while you've seen the site plan, the only thing we're specifically requesting is approval to put that road in place. The intention is it is a privately funded road that could be dedicated over at completion. So the reason why it is done that way is because that way it doesn't have public funds that come into it, and we actually need that to build. So without that road, we have no way in and out of the property without physically going through the neighborhood. So I understand that the plan, and I believe it was JCA, the city's engineer, talked about Maple as well being a 2-way road. Our intention is we're going to come back and talk about that later. Our main request today is to be able to just put the road through the site. Once that road is approved, we can get Frisch's and their owner to sign off on the easements going away at completion, and then we can start our building design. So we can't design our building right now until we know what we're designing around. So as soon as that's done, and we know how we're going to access the property, we can start designing the building and marketing it towards commercial tenants. So I imagine we'll have questions about curb cuts, things like that, but we'll leave that to the city based on their current code, and we'll be back with full building plans to present to everybody for approval. This is just requesting approval for the road itself.
Questions for Mr. Lingenfelter?
I just have a real quick question.
Yes, sir.
Nick, are you planning on then, ultimately, this will be designed per, who is our city engineer?
JMA, I'm sorry, I said JC, I apologize.
It'll be under inspections by him, so it's certified?
Correct, yes, it'll be compacted, it'll be to commercial road standards, meet all city requirements. I think the one question we had right now is, it's a 50-foot right-of-way, so it is a wider commercial road. That's designed that way specifically for the fire department to get their trucks around. If we need to make that more narrow, we can work with the city on that. Our primary request is just to be able to put a road there. The actual widths we can work with, we just need a way to do that. We also, the only curb cuts we've committed to or trying to commit to are where Frisch's would physically exit. So the majority of their business comes from a drive-through business right now, and they need the ability to be able to pull out of that drive-through. So that's why you see the curb cuts there.
Any other?
Yes, sir.
I think I heard you say that the street's going to be wider. piece?
That is I want to say it's 2.5 lanes wide, and then we could do some, because if you look at 50-foot right-of-way, so even outside of the road lines itself, there's like a right-of-way line.
So the existing crown has a 50-foot right-of-way and 30 feet of pavement. Now, and you're saying your part, the new part of crown, is going to be wider, but you're only showing 25 feet of pavement.
So no, it's the same pavement widths, but the right-of-way is still there at 50 feet, so we have the ability to flex there if we need to. We won't build in the right-of-way.
There will be no parking on the new part of crown?
The intention is there would be no parking on Crown, correct?
Two-way traffic?
Two-way traffic. We have the ability to squeeze a
Sidewalk
few
only
in,
on
but
one side?
we don't know. I mean, when we design the buildings, we'll figure out where the sidewalks go. At this point, I was just trying to get the road narrowed in. We have the width to put sidewalks on both sides. We would definitely have it on our side of the property. I don't think it's necessary on Frisch's side. So all it would require if we put it on Frisch's side is that we dedicate more land to them.
So we are not you're not asking for us to approve the sidewalks, the curb cuts, any of that. You're asking for us to approve the new part of Crown Avenue and the 50 feet of right-of-way with the 25-foot road surface.
Correct. And the only curb cuts that I'll clarify, Frisch's will likely have their 2 curb cuts where we have them shown, nothing on where the new development will come. Because Frisch's needs to get in and out. So those 2, what we've shown you for Frisch's, would be where they would go in and out of their facility. Does that make, okay.
I mean, so it will be a dedicated street, meaning that once it is completed, per the specifications, the city engineer's specifications, once it's completed, it's a dedicated street, it's deeded over to the city of Norwood, and we are responsible for maintaining that street after it's dedicated.
Correct. That is the intention right now. But that would also require a city council vote. We're aware of that. So the idea is we approve the road today, and then the city council will hear that later to verify that they still want it dedicated. Either way, though, the public is driving on it. It's a public road. I would say that from a public and safety perspective, and even a fire perspective, I imagine the city is going to want to control that, because if it's us privately maintaining it, if we're waiting for a snow plow to make sure the fire truck can get in, it's probably the last thing the city wants to do. Not that we don't want to, but we hire private contractors, not city trucks.
No, we
So,
want to dedicate it.
yeah, we would dedicate it at
It needs to be
completion.
a dedicated
Yeah.
street.
But for today, what you're asking us to do is to approve the creation of a private street.
Creation of the private street to be dedicated at completion with city sign-off and approval by council.
And
Correct.
curb cuts would be done under the city's normal process, not part of this.
Under the normal process, just the exits where we've shown Frisch's.
Any further questions?
And this might not be for Nick, it might be for the plan itself. There's a reference in here a lot to Norwood US 22 safety study. Is that something that was implemented by the city of Cincinnati and or city of Norwood and our engineer? I'm just curious.
There's
It's
a
referenced all over this drawing.
There's a pedestrian safety plan, but that does not, I don't think it includes, this is showing green space and some sort of islands. I don't think it includes those. And we're not approving those
I know,
with what we're doing.
I'm just curious, that's why I said it's probably not a Nick
There's
question.
concerns, I have many concerns on some of the other layout stuff here.
Okay,
But
but I noticed the traffic signals removed and I didn't see it being added. But that's okay, we're not here to talk about that.
Yeah, we're not here to talk about it yet. We obviously will be back to work with the city on what those solutions are.
Okay, I mean, from that standpoint, I know what we're approving, the right-of-way. You own all the property, though, in the right-of-way presently, right?
That is our property. There's no issues with environmental impacts there. It is 100% clean. Yep.
Mr. Skilling?
Just have a question to clarify when it was mentioned with regards to the curb cuts. So just to be clear, with regards to the plan that you see in front of you right now, definitely for the existing Frisch's, it shows, at least along the extension of Crown Avenue, 2 new potential access points. And I'll raise it at least more as a concern. So my concern being the proposed one on the north side that's closest to Montgomery. I believe when our city engineer will look at that, or their traffic engineers, that might give them some pause just with regards to access, separation standards, et cetera. So in light of the fact that we have an existing commercial entity, a larger mixed use to the site, unknown entity to the west, I just don't know if that would be an appropriate geometric design until the city engineer would sign off on it. So if the understanding is that, including the cart weight, we talked about whether it's going to be 30 feet or 25 feet or 36 or another standard, at least me personally, I would rather leave that to the city engineer to let us know what's the best design. But my only, I guess, initial bias would be, I'm concerned about that immediate access point once you come in off a major arterial being Montgomery.
Understand the concern, and I would say that our engineers, Bear Becker, they have been working with the city's engineer. I know that they've shown each other the plan multiple times and gone back and forth and provided their comments. You are correct, we typically want to see it at least 50 feet from a major corner. I also know that there's a strip of city property there that they have to work with, so we will make sure there's adequate spacing.
Additional discussion? I think in taking a look at this, in terms of the scope of the width of the street, I would want that extension of Crown to maintain the same width as the existing portion of Crown Avenue. So stay, I'm trying to think the right word here, basically maintain the same width from current Crown through to Montgomery Road. Pardon?
Consistent?
Yes. In addition to that, I think if this is meeting all the criteria that's necessary from the city's engineer to be a public dedicated street, they sign off on the design, sign off on the construction having been done in compliance with that design, I don't have any issues with this moving forward. Mr. Mayor?
I'd like to make a motion. I would make a motion to approve the creation of the Crown Avenue extension from Montgomery Road to Station Avenue, maintaining the same width as existing Crown Avenue, to be built to city engineering standards and legally dedicated to the city upon completion. Does that encapsulate what you...
I believe that it does. Do I have a second?
Second.
Mrs. Town, would you please call the roll?
Chairman Powers?
Yes.
Mayor Schneider?
Yes.
Mr. Hockney?
Yes.
Mr. Sewer?
Yes.
Motion is approved. Moving on to item D2, number 2, proposed change to lot layout building footprint for Phase 1B of Factory 52. Developer now proposes a 5-story L-shaped building, multifamily with ground floor parking, 80 spaces and 128 dwelling units, 52 studios, 72 one-bedroom, and 4 two-bedroom. The approved final planned unit development plan for Phase 1 illustrates a 3-story multifamily buildings with a total of 72 units. Height of the new building will be 60 feet. Latest plan modification to Phase 1 will bring the proposed dwelling unit yield to 442, which is below the total target yield overall density of 600 dwelling units. Invite Mr. Lingenfelter back to the podium if you'd like to discuss this topic.
Thank you, Chairman Powers, and I apologize, I have my computer because I didn't make it to the office yet today to print anything out. So there are 2 different items, that's correct. We're talking about the L-shaped pad first, which we refer to as Phase 1B. In the original PUD, it actually showed it up as 3 broken up buildings, roughly 8 feet apart, but the total unit count was actually counted to be up to 150 units. So we knew that it was going to be a lot more, and even our CRA abatement is actually up to 150. So at the end of the day, we're putting 128 here, and the one change based on our review of the PUD was that it originally showed it between 3 and 4 stories. This building is going to be 5. And the reason why is we want to provide more parking. Obviously, parking is a consistent question that comes up. That's why we provided a parking analysis. It will not park 1-to-1, which is typically what we see for this type of building, but we do have overflow parking of about 260 to 300 spaces on the highway. That highway land will be something forthcoming to the Planning Commission. We're going to add an additional parking garage as well, but for now, we have the overflow spaces until that garage is completed. Against the main, every material, every part of the building, everything meets the original design intent. There's no changes to that materiality. The garage will have to have some type of screening where the window openings would have been or something else on that first floor, but it will aesthetically look as most of the other buildings on the property do. For us, this building is visible from the park. It is critical that we get it right and not just have a concrete post sitting there, the first thing that everyone sees. So that's the main request for this building, and then the building next to it that you see as well was also on there. This is what they call the future mixed-use building. There was two, I believe, in the submission, and the main request there is to verify the height. So that building, I believe, was originally scheduled to be 5 stories, 4 over a podium. We're looking closer to 70, well, I'm sorry, what's the height on that one? That was 150 feet. It's 11 stories roughly. So the main reason for that is we saw kind of an opportunity to make this signature building all the way at the back of the property. So we can kind of buffer the highway, create this bookend on both sides, and we've always made sure that every building stays under the height of the clock tower. So request number 1 is the L-shaped building, 128 units. Request number 2 is the height of the second building, again around 100 and some odd units, 120, 130, depending on the design. The reason that we need to know that the height is okay is because it will cost almost $1 million to design that building, and we don't want to spend that money and then all of a sudden find out the height was not. So again, every material meets the required PUD. Everything is as it's currently zoned. It's just verifying those 2 items is what we're requesting.
How tall did you say the building would be in stories?
I'll verify it. Just give me 1 second. I apologize. I don't want to say it's 150, but give me, you have the height of it. It's just under the crest of the clock tower. So if you look at the observation deck right now, we're not exceeding that height. I want to say it's 150 feet. It's around 11 stories. Typically 12 feet of floor.
Thank you. And if you would, I just want to make sure everybody understands which building we're talking about on this map, which is included in everybody's packet. Nick, that's the building in the center at the top, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Just point to it, yeah.
That one, okay.
Point over this way. The center one.
Questions for Mr. Lingenfelter? Mr. Mayor?
How are you?
That's going to close, I mean, you're talking about what I would consider to be a tall building. If you're in the common space area, that's really going to close everything off.
The idea is that we book in some of the highway noise. Bookends the highway noise, kind of brings it all together in one consolidated area. And then what we do is, as we build that parking garage on the other side, we would create a streetscape that matches, where you'd never really know that the parking garage is there. But the idea is that we book in both ends of the park to truly create that central community corridor. I would also note, sir, that those are primarily targeted to be sort of 2 bedrooms, which are much higher-end units. So the idea is that we create our higher-end units on the park, give them the park view, create that whole central park feel, and we put the smaller units towards the outside.
Additional questions?
Again, I'm not familiar with the PUD for that site. I'm just curious, was an apartment mix part of the PUD submission?
It was.
There's no required ratio.
Okay.
We verbally always said our target was 60-40, 60% 1-bedrooms and studios.
But it was loose?
It was loose, correct.
Okay. That's the only thing as I read through that seemed like, was there something in the PUD that said what was the target?
It actually specifically says that we would modify the future phases based on demand. The one thing that we know today is our 3 bedrooms are the 1 units that we have left. There's no studios, there's no 1s. Our 2s are doing very well, there's very few of those left. It's the larger units that aren't getting rented at the same rate.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Additional questions? Discussion?
Thank you.
Thank you.
This one covers that one, right? So it's an Nick, I'm sorry you sat down, I know, but this is talking about 80 ground floor parking spaces, 128 apartment dwelling units. Is that correct?
That is correct, because we have overflow in the garage next door, as well as we have excess spaces on the highway lane that we'll be striping in the next 2 weeks. And the reason, just so you know, we're staging, I keep talking about a future parking garage. I have nothing to show you because it's not designed. We know the garage has to be started before the taller building in the middle of the park, but I'm just requesting approval to start that design because of the costs. I just want to make sure the height's not going to be an issue before we get there.
Keep talking about cost.
Well, sir, gone up 45% since we started, so it's a lot.
Nick, in the final PUD submission on the second building, what was the original height specified?
That was 5
This
stories.
is 5 stories?
Yeah.
Okay.
It was 8 over a podium of retail is what we're proposing. It was originally 4 over a podium, so we're adding 4 floors to it.
Okay, thank you. Mr.
Yep.
Skelly?
Yeah, just, I'll keep it back. So just to be clear, so the L-shaped Phase 1B will be 5 stories.
A 4 over 1.
And
Yep.
then the mixed use will be 11 stories.
It'd be 8 over 2. The reason the commercial space is usually between 15 and 20 feet, so that's why we count it as like a 2-floor.
Okay. So it would be one level of commercial space, but...
Correct, yeah, we don't know what that is, whether that's going to be restaurant space, and that, we don't know at the moment. We've got a lot of requests even for like event space, so we're just working through how that's going to come into play.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions or discussion? Would anyone like to offer a motion?
Well, maybe,
I just have a quick, one more question.
Yes.
So here's the proposed language for this one item, or, because I'm hearing about this 11-story, really 8 plus 2. Where is that written here?
That is not included in our agenda packet. The agenda packet...
Okay, that's what I'm missing.
It wasn't given to us.
Okay, I don't see that, so it can't be included in a motion, right?
correct. And I think what he's saying
I
is...
guess it could be, but I just don't see it here. And again,
I think that was missed from our submission, so the submission that we have has them all on there. I think it just got missed in the comment section.
okay, I mean, you've explained it well, I understand it, and thanks to the chairperson that showed me on the map where we're talking about that building. And I don't have a problem with it, so I'm not... Is this a public hearing?
No, it's not a public hearing. Yeah, the submission shows design details for the L-shaped building.
The L-shaped.
On the second building, all they're asking for at this time is the height
Okay.
change from the final PUD.
So that would be, needed to be added here.
That would need to be added if we wanted to.
Is that building called something then?
8 plus 2, 8 plus...
Does it have a name like Phase 3 or Phase 2?
It's 1C, 1B and 1C.
1B
C?
Yeah. We call it, in the PUD and the CRA agreement, they call it the Central Park Mixed Use Building.
Central Park mixed-use
That's what they
building.
refer to it as.
I am not that familiar with this, so I'm not really feel comfortable in making a proposal on it. I'm just not that familiar with it.
Okay, understood.
May I take a shot at a motion that can be corrected
Yes.
as we go? Planning Commission approve minor change modification to Phase 1 of Factory 52, final PUD plan as per 1155.26 to now include the 5-story L-shaped building, 1C,
1B.
that's 1B, with ground floor parking of 80 spaces and 128 apartment dwelling units, and the 8/2 Central Park Mixed-Use Building 1C.
Do I have a second?
Do we have that right first? That encompasses what we're trying to accomplish here. And really, all we're trying to do is give you the approval to move forward with spending the money on that design.
For really the
Well,
height.
I shouldn't say that.
Correct.
That's not just what
But I mean, it's the height, the big issue, the 8+2.
yeah.
But yes. Yes, that would change it from a 5-story building in the initial plan to the 11-story building.
As you bring that point up, we've got the assistant fire chief sitting in the back. Maybe we can ask fire assistant chief, since he already come up and talk about an 8+2 building, and what does that do for the city's ability to provide emergency services?
If you would, please state and spell your name.
Brody Cianciolo, Brodie, Cianciolo, Cianciolo,
You're the assistant fire chief.
Assistant Fire Chief. I believe that would make that the tallest building, occupiable building that we have in Norwood, if I'm not mistaken. I would assume that they have to meet fire code, so I don't have a lot of concerns there. Access-wise, as long as all that access remains consistent. It'd just be a learning curve for the fire department. We don't have anything that tall, so I'm sure we'll make it and get there. So if anybody's got questions.
What is currently the tallest building in
So probably the Rookwood building, the Rookwood office tower.
How tall is that?
8 stories.
8 stories.
And does this overreach our ladder truck? I know the guys were up on it last weekend. It was
Our ladder is 110 feet, so it would be over the top of our.
yeah. Okay.
Any further questions for the assistant chief? Anything else that you think is important for us to consider?
Not that I can think of.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We have a motion on the floor that the Planning Commission approve the minor change modification to the Phase 1 Factory 52 final PUD plan as per S 1155.26 to now include a 5-story L-shaped building, 1B, with ground floor parking, 80 spaces, and 128 apartment dwelling units, and the 8/2 Central Park mixed-use building, 1C. Do I have a second for that motion?
I'll second.
Seconded by Mr. Sewer. Mrs. Town, please call the roll.
Chairman Powers,
Yes.
Mayor Schneider,
Yes.
Mr. Hockney,
Yes.
Mr. Sewer,
Yes.
Moving on to item E, old business. Any old business? Seeing none, I would like to add item F, excuse our absent member. I have a motion to excuse our absent member.
So moved.
Second, Mr. Sewer. Mrs. Town, would you please call the roll?
Chairman Powers,
Yes.
Mayor Schneider,
Yes.
Mr. Hockney,
Yes.
Mr. Sewer.
Yes.
Item G, adjournment. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Could I ask that we have a little bit of an open discussion real quick on the group?
Yes.
Or you want to do that after you adjourn?
Yeah, we should do that.
On record?
Yes.
I just have I've been asked by citizens, is there anything that has come before this planning commission, before I got on here, that covers the Lexington Avenue development site? I think everybody here knows what's the reason, but I don't know that we've had anything formalized.
During my time here, there has not been anything that's come to the
Okay.
Planning Commission on the Pond Realty site, which is that southern portion of Lexington Avenue.
Correct.
I do not know
But
that before that.
there's zoning over that. There was specific zoning put over that years ago.
It was a PUD.
Yeah, with the
Oh,
PUD.
and I'm aware of that because of University Station, so.
Yeah.
But I was just curious if there's anything in the last, because I've been on here now a year and a half or whatever, prior to that.
Presented anything.
Okay. Very good. I was just curious.
Okay. Moving on now to Well, let me ask, any other new business? Seeing none, move on to item H, adjournment. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Do I have a second?
Yes, second.
Mrs. Town, please call the roll.
Chairman Powers,
Yes.
Mayor Schneider,
Yes.
Mr. Hockney,
Yes.
Mr. Sewer.
Yes.
We are now adjourned at 4:50. Thank you, everyone.